And looking at Chapter 8, we focus on securing information systems. So overall, here we introduce the need for both security and controls in today's businesses in order to safeguard our overall information systems within an organization. Think about a security technique and potentially an example of a control that might be used in a business that you are employed in or that you have familiarity with, or even a university that you've experienced. Here we look at the main categories of threats to information systems. Note that when large amounts of data are stored digitally on computers and servers and in databases, they're vulnerable to many more kinds of threats than when they were stored in manual form on paper, in folders, and in filing cabinets. When data are available over a network, there are even more vulnerabilities. Have you ever lost data on your computer? What was the reason? Was it a hardware problem, software, some type of disaster, other people? So, on the other hand, digital records are not vulnerable in ways that manual records in a filing cabinet are vulnerable. And so, for instance, you really can't tell who has accessed manual records or when in a physical file. In a database, file access is monitored, obviously, unless a hacker has found a way to read records without leaving their digital trail. The architecture of a web-based application typically includes a web client, a server, and corporate information systems that are linked to databases. Each of those individual components, unfortunately, presents security challenges and vulnerabilities. Floods, fires, power failures, other electrical problems can cause disruptions at any point in the network. Here we see the types of threats to the security systems and the points over the network at which these threats are prevalent. Some problems occur at the client computer, others through the network lines, corporate servers, or in corporate hardware and software. Here we look at the type of threats that large public networks, such as the internet, face because they are open to virtually anyone. Note that the internet is so huge that when abuses do occur, they can have an enormously widespread impact. And when the internet becomes part of the corporate network, the organization's information systems are even more vulnerable to actions from outsiders. The internet was not designed at inception to be a secure, quote unquote, network, such as, for instance, the telephone system network. We all get junk spam telephone calls, but hackers have been not able, yet at least, to take control of your telephone or systematically disrupt telephone service for individuals. When we look at wireless coverage, we look at different security threats related to those networks. Local area networks, or LANs, using the 802.11 standard can be easily penetrated by outsiders armed with laptops, wireless cards, external antennae, and hacking software. Hackers use these tools to detect unprotected networks, monitor network traffic, and in some cases, gain access to the internet or to corporate networks. Many Wi-Fi networks can be penetrated easily by intruders using sniffer programs to obtain an address to access the resources of a network without authorization. Here, this graphic illustrates why wireless networks are vulnerable. The service set identifiers, or SSIDs, identifying the access points in a Wi-Fi network are broadcast multiple times, as we can see illustrated by the orange sphere, and can be picked up fairly easily by intruders' sniffer programs. This slide identifies the various types of malware that threaten IS systems and computers. Have you ever had a problem with a virus? Do you know how your system got infected? Note that there are now many thousands of viruses and worms targeting mobile phones, blogs, wikis, and social networks such as Facebook, Twitter, or I guess I should say the X, LinkedIn, and Pinterest are new conduits for malware and spyware. Malware is a serious problem. Over the past decade, worms and viruses have caused billions of dollars of damage to corporate networks, email systems, and even data. We continue the discussion of the types of malware from the previous slide. Note that SQL injection attacks are a significant malware threat. Why do you think that's so? These attacks enable hackers access to underlying databases that support web application, such as the sales of products and services, e-commerce financial data, and other classified information. So in other words, the database is where the information is located. SQL databases have little or no built-in security once a hacker gets beyond the entrance point to a corporate network. Ransomware is also proliferating. This slide looks at the people who commit computer crime and the various types of computer crime. Do you know what the difference is between hackers and crackers? And if they agree with the definition, have any of you been the victim of computer crime or invasion of privacy? What is the ultimate purpose of spoofing and sniffing? Note that there are legitimate uses of sniffing. Sniffers can help identify network trouble spots or spot criminal activity on a network. Sniffers can also be used to identify copyrighted data being sent over networks. So, for instance, pirated music or video files. What is the result of a denial of service attack? The Mirai botnet was responsible for a large-scale denial of service attack that disrupted the operations of Etsy, Netflix, and other major websites. Bots and botnets are an extremely serious threat because they can be used to launch very large attacks using many different techniques. Here we look at the legal definition of computer crime and the two main classes. The text lists a variety of other examples for computers as targets and instruments of crime. Note that the U.S. Congress addressed the threat of computer crime in 1986 with the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. This act makes it illegal to access a computer without authorization. The text lists other legislation to counter computer crime, such as the National Information Infrastructure Protection Act in 1996, to make virus distribution a hacker attacks to disable websites federal crime. And here we continue with the discussion of the types of computer crime. As many of us are aware, or maybe have experienced, identity theft is a growing problem and is often the result of hackers employing various phishing techniques. Note that cyber criminal activities are borderless. The global nature of the internet makes it possible for cyber criminals to operate anywhere in the world. One concern is the use of computer attacks by organized governments, and that such attacks might target major infrastructure such as electrical grids. The text says that there are at least 30, if not more, countries, including China, believed to be developing offensive and defensive cyber warfare capabilities. One of the leading, if not the leading countries in cyber warfare is the United States. Here we look at another source of security problems: our own people inside the company with access to a system. Have you ever worked somewhere with a vulnerable password system? Have you ever revealed your password to anyone? What are some solutions to password security? Some financial institutions, believe it or not, assign users a new password every day or every hour. I seriously could not ever imagine that. Looking at security and other vulnerabilities caused by software errors, which ultimately open networks to intruders. For example, Equifax software was hacked in 2017, resulting in the loss of personal information of over 150 million people. Microsoft Service Pack upgrades to its operating system and application software are examples of patches. Failure to install Windows and Office Service Packs is one common source of security breaches. Can you give an example of how inadequate security or control can pose a serious legal liability? The text gives us the example of Target, which was sued by its customers in a class action lawsuit for allowing hackers to access its systems and steal credit and debit card data for fraudulent purchase. Here we look at the business value of security and control, examining the legal requirements for electronic records management. Note that Sarbanes-Oxley Act was designed to protect investors after the scandals at Enron, WorldCom, and other publicly traded companies. Sarbanes-Oxley, or SOX, is fundamentally about ensuring that internal controls are in place to govern the creation and documentation of information in financial statements. Because managing this data involves information systems must then implement controls to make sure this information is accurate and to enforce integrity, confidentiality, and accuracy. Here we continue the discussion of the business value of security and control. Security, control, and electronic records management are essential today for responding to legal actions. Note that in a legal action, a firm is obligated to respond to a discovery request for access to information that may be used as evidence, and the company is required by law to produce the data. The cost to responding to a discovery request can be enormous if the company has trouble assembling the required data or the data has been corrupted or destroyed. Courts impose severe financial and even criminal penalties for improper destruction of electronic documents. Given the legal requirements for electronic records, it is important that an awareness of computer forensics should be incorporated into a firm's contingency planning process. To improve security for a firm's information systems, it's important to create a framework that supports security. This includes establishing information system controls, understanding the risk to the firm's IS systems, and establishing security policies that are appropriate for the firm. This slide looks at controls used in information systems. Remember that controls are methods, policies, and organizational procedures that ensure safety of an organization's assets, accuracy and reliability of its accounting records, and operational adherence to management standards. Controls could be manual or automated. Can you explain the difference between manual and automated controls? There are two main types of controls: general controls and application controls. General controls apply to all computerized applications. A list of the types of general controls appears on the next slide. This slide looks at another important factor in establishing an appropriate framework for security and control: risk assessment. Although not all risks can be anticipated and measured, most businesses should be able to identify many of the risks they face and understand their potential losses. This table illustrates sample results of a risk assessment for an online order processing system that processes 30,000 orders per day. The likelihood of each exposure occurring over a 1-year period is expressed as a percentage. The expected annual loss is a result of multiplying the probability by the average loss. This slide looks at the need for a firm to establish a security policy for protecting a company's assets, as well as other company policies this security policy drives, and ultimately how information systems support that. Can you think of what types of issues would be covered? We also look at the area of security policy involved in managing identities of system users. Why must businesses consider it important to specify which portion of an information system a user has access to? What kinds of information requires very high levels of security access? What rules might be used to determine access rules? One rule is need to know. These two examples represent two security profiles or data security patterns that might be found in a personnel system. Depending on the security profile, a user would have certain restrictions on access to various systems, locations, or data in that organization. This slide continues the discussion of essential activities a firm performs to maximize security and control. Here, looking at the planning for activities should a disaster occur, such as a flood, earthquake, or power outage. Note that disaster recovery plans focus primarily on the technical issues involved in keeping systems up and running, such as which files to back up and the maintenance of backup computer systems or disaster recovery services. Credit card firms, for instance, maintain duplicate computer centers to serve as an emergency backup to their primary computer centers. Overall, this slide looks at the role of auditing. An MIS audit enables a firm to determine if existing security measures and controls are effective. Having experience as a technology auditor for Ernst & Young in the technology and security risk services practice, I can tell you very important in working with financial auditors in looking at security audits, user control or user program access, as well as program change control. This chart is a sample page from a list of control weaknesses that an auditor might find in a loan system in a local commercial bank. This form helps auditors record and evaluate control weaknesses and shows the results of discussing those weaknesses with management, as well as any corrective action management takes. This slide looks at the technologies used for identifying and authenticating users. Which of the various authentication methods seem to be the most foolproof? Passwords are traditional methods for authentication, and newer methods include tokens, smart cards, and biometric authentication. Smartphones typically now use fingerprint authentication, and some PCs can be ordered with fingerprint authentication of the user. Can we think of some of the problems with strict biometric authentication for PCs or smartphones? We look at an essential tool used to prevent intruders from accessing private networks, the firewall. To create a strong firewall, an administrator must maintain detailed internal rules identifying the people, applications, or addresses that are allowed or rejected. Firewalls can deter, but not completely prevent, network penetration by outsiders and should be viewed as one element in an overall security plan. The firewall is placed between the firm's private network and the public internet or another distrusted network to protect against unauthorized traffic. This slide looks at additional tools to prevent unwanted intruders and software from accessing the network. Here we look at tools and technologies used to secure wireless networks. This slide introduces the use of encryption to ensure that data traveling along networks cannot be read by unauthorized users. This slide discusses the use of encryption to ensure, again, that data traveling along networks cannot be read by those that should not have access to it. Public key encryption uses two keys, one shared or public and one totally private. The keys are mathematically related, so the data encrypted with one key can be decrypted using only the other key. To send and receive messages, communicators first create separate pairs of private and public keys. The public key is kept in a directory and the private key must be kept secret. The sender encrypts a message with the recipient's public key. On receiving the message, the recipient uses his or her private key to decrypt it. Today, a typical key will be 128 bits long. A public key encryption system can be viewed as a series of public and private keys that lock data when they are transmitted and unlock the data when they are received. The sender locates the recipient's public key in a directory and uses it to encrypt a message. The message is sent in encrypted form over the internet or a private network. When the encrypted message arrives, the recipient uses his or her private key to decrypt the data and read the message. This slide looks at the use of digital certificates as a tool to help protect online transactions. Digital certificates are used in conjunction with public key encryption to validate the identities of two parties in a transaction before data is exchanged. Here we look at the option of securing transactions with blockchain. Digital certificates help establish the identity of people or electronic assets. They protect online transactions by providing secure, encrypted online communication. This graphic illustrates the process for using digital certificates. The institution or individual requests a certificate over the internet. The certificate is received and can then be used to validate a transaction with an online merchant or customer. Looking at technologies and tools for ensuring system availability. Note that firms with heavy e-commerce processing or for firms that depend on digital networks for their internal operations require, at minimum, high availability computing using tools such as backup servers, distribution of processing across multiple servers, high capacity storage, and good disaster recovery and business continuity plans. This slide describes security concerns specific to the cloud computing and mobile computing. What key factors are there to consider in ensuring a provider has adequate protection? So, downtime, privacy, and privacy rules in accordance with jurisdiction, external audits, and disaster planning. Now we look at securing mobile systems. What specific concerns are there with mobile devices? One very common security breach involves employees losing phones while traveling. In some cases, the rule is lose your phone, lose your job. Mobile devices such as tablets will increasingly store a considerable amount of corporate information. Then again, if the data is largely stored in the cloud and passwords are required for access, then we reduce the threat. This slide looks at ensuring software quality as a way to improve system quality and reliability by employing software metrics and rigorous testing. Ongoing use of metrics allows the information systems department and end users to jointly measure the performance of the system, identify problems as they occur, and hopefully come to a quick and efficient resolution.